Okay, we are live. So, for those listening at home, welcome to the Live from the Sword Coast podcast. My name is Kevin Madison, and I will be your friendly dungeon muser today. Today, we are participating, or rather, we are broadcasting another installment of the Seat Behind the Screen series, where I'm having a conversation with buddies of mine who are dungeon masters and players as well. And today, my special guest is Sean Phelan.
Greetings. Good to be with you, Kevin.
Good to be with you too. So before we went live, we started chatting and unfortunately launched into a lot of the stuff we wanted to talk about. So we're going to do a little bit of revisiting of that as we go through today. But
Sure.
from the as a way of structuring this conversation, I think what we'll do is we'll give a little bit of background or talk a little bit of background about what who Sean is, what his gaming background is. And then we'll launch into a discussion about online gaming and conventions, because that's how Sean and I came to know each other, is through Sean was good enough to, as far back as I believe like a year ago, you gave me some links to a bunch of online conventions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but let's start enough about me. Let's start with you. So, Sean, why don't you tell us who you are?
Let's see. I live in San
Existential
Francisco.
question, but
Right. Live in San Francisco. Let's see. I don't want to jump ahead because I was going to. I noticed on your thoughts of talking thoughts that I'm talking about, my gaming background. So let's see. Other than gaming,
you can bleed it to whatever you like. The show notes are really just a loose guide for how our conversation. So go nuts.
So I'm in the financial industry. I've got at the moment, at least, I've got pretty good control over my schedule, so that's helpful for gaming. Who knows what that looks like for the future, but right now I've got pretty good control. Gaming wise, I gamed in high school. That's where I got my start, and Traveler was the main game. I played a little bit of Champions.
Which edition of Traveler? Was it the original black box or
original black box?
Very cool.
And yep. That's really what spurred it all. I mean, we loved that game. What else do we do? We not just a touch of D&D, but not really. And that's maybe a little bit of Gamma World. But that's all I remember. And at that point, after high school, I did not game at all until decades later, about 6 years ago.
What brought you back to the hobby?
So a buddy of mine, about an hour's drive away in San Jose, pinged me one day and said he was looking for a collectible and he's going to be in San Francisco shopping for it. So let's get together, hang out with him, and then we'll go to dinner. So I said, fair enough. Well, one of the places he was looking was San Francisco's main gaming store, Gamescape. And while there, I'm hanging out. He's looking for it, and I'm hanging out, browsing the RPG books, and there, that's what it took. So I'm like, oh, so I found a book of Dark Heresy, and the rest is history. And back in I went.
Nice.
Yeah.
So during the break or the hiatus you had from gaming, was there other like spillover or like corollary nerd stuff that you were involved with, like comics or video games or
That's a good question. Interestingly, I would say only one, because I've always liked games. So irrespective of irrespective of what kind of games, as a kid, I was huge into games, huge into board games. And so there wasn't in that break, there's a surprisingly absence of spillover, with one exception, that I was really into poker for about 10 years.
Oh, okay.
And which is a great game, like highly recommend it. 10 minutes to learn, lifetime to master, where you're dealing very interpersonal game, where people are under a ton of pressure, and it's just fantastic. So love that game. So I was very into that game. I would love to get back to that game at some point, but that's really the only thing I can name in that huge gap. It's a notable item, but it's like the only one. Didn't do anything really other than that. And then
did you read a lot of genre stuff still? Like, were you still sort of into like sci-fi or fantasy or stuff like that?
Yeah, I was. It just, I kind of got out of the habit of I just got out of the habit of it, because as a kid I was huge into sci-fi fantasy. It was constant. Like that was a big hobby. And after with college, I just had, I don't know, I just got busy, and I was into sports, career stuff, moving, all this kind of thing. And it got by me. And it's so funny that once I got to that store and I'm looking through it and I'm like, holy crap, I still am so drawn to this. And I put it down and I'm like, okay, I'm not buying this. And like, then I leave and I had all those I had that classic question of, do adults even do that? Like, I didn't even, because I had no even contact with it. So days pass and I'm like, oh man, I gotta like check that out. And so I went on eBay looking for used books, thinking, okay, maybe I'll get like a cheap gateway book. Like I'm not gonna put hundreds of dollars into this or something. I'm just gonna see if there's a used copy, at least I can read it and enjoy it and good enough. So, I buy one of those for, $10 and I'm like, oh, I'm bit. Like this is bad. So
that's great. And the Dark Heresy that you were getting into, that's the Fantasy Flight one?
Yeah, that's one of the Fantasy Flight games in the Warhammer 40,000. That's an RPG in the Warhammer 40,000.
Oh, that's interesting. So what type of like what sort of your go-to systems? You and I played, or rather I played in your Cypher game, and Cypher is a very rules light game, certainly by comparison to Dark Heresy. So like what other sort of games are your sort of go-tos?
So this spurred me last night. I track my games since 2012, everything I've played, every session, and who was in it, if I remember, and all that kind of stuff, like what was the event and that kind of thing. So which is cool for this because, and I track it on RPG Geek. If you're familiar with that, it lets you track your games. So I made a little list for this very moment. So the games I've run the most, so it's Dark Heresy, because that caused me to jump into to start a 3-year campaign online. Yeah. We played every other week for 8 hours a pop. So that was 72 8-hour sessions. And then the next one down which is a pretty big drop off, Force and Destiny. I'm currently running, and I've been running that for 27 sessions, but for only 3 to 4 hours a piece. And after that, Numenera. After that, Shadow the Demon Lord. After that, Knights Black Agents, Cypher System, Fear Itself. So those are some things. Those are things I've run. And then what was the question?
What are your go-to games now? I mean, I think you pretty much answered that.
I think I have. I mean, not all those are my go-to games. Like games that I'm actually like that I'm looking to run right now. And some of this is just getting it to the table. Like it's not necessarily, I'm skipping around here, but it's not necessarily go-to as much as it's it's games I'm looking forward to. And it's possible that once I play them for 10 sessions, I'm good. I can move on. But the games I'm looking at, like I'd like to run now, are like Legends of the Five Rings, which I've played a fair amount of.
The most recent, like the Fantasy Flight version, or the?
No, I haven't tried that. The 4th edition from AEG.
Okay, yeah.
That's an excellent edition, which is, it made, it's a whole other subject, but it made the FFG's new version a little dicey for them because they're, I appreciate it, and I think they had to do it to some extent, but they're making a new edition where the last one was pretty much beloved. Like that's a cult classic. That 4th edition, everyone was happy with that.
It's a solid,
solid.
Like,
so
it's sort of it's a great exemplar of what can happen with iterative games. Where when they got to the 4th edition, that was really, it was standing on the shoulders of giants of the previous editions, but they did a fucking great job of just like, here's every possible game you might want to run in, or here's the material for any kind of game you'd want to run in Legend of the Five Rings. Because the amount of schools and like master schools and or what are the advanced schools they're called, advanced schools and monsters and whatever, it's and mini rules and stuff like that. Like it's everything. It was clear they were trying to be like, this is our final word on this role playing in this setting. There you go.
It was a good job. But Simbaroom, for example, is something I'm trying to play now, but I never played it. So I mean, we'll see. That's a new game I picked up in a bundle of holding. Conan, which you've run quite a bit of.
Yep.
I've played it like 2 or 3 times, and I would like to play it more and run it at some point. What else? John Carter of Mars, which isn't out yet, but I backed it, and I'd like to run that. Yeah, the One Ring, Blades in the Dark, Wrath and Glory. That's the new Warhammer 40,000 RPG.
Yep.
So it took the place of Dark Heresy, Rogue Trader, Death Watch, Black Crusade, and Only War. So those
Yep.
were all RPGs in the Warhammer 40,000 by FFG, and then the license changed hands, and now Ulysses North America has put together Wrath and Glory to be all of those. And I haven't played it yet, but that's all. So anyway, these are the games. So
Okay,
some of
cool.
it's not go-to, but the games I'm interested in.
That's interesting because it's that's a pretty big spread between like more narrative focused games like Cypher and Blades in the Dark and stuff like that, and more crunchy games like the Wrath and Glory and Five Rings to a degree as well. I mean, it's a fairly mechanic intensive game.
Yeah, no, good call. I mean, I kind of like them all. I mean, I don't necessarily like them all equally, but I like them all. I also have on that list, for example, Bedlam Hall. So that's a pretty new Powered by the Apocalypse game that sounded interesting to me. And I've never run any Powered by the Apocalypse, and I've played it very little. And that would never take the place of traditional RPGs for me, but super fun. I mean, it's a really, I like the fact that it's a very different way of engaging with RPGs. So the first time I did it, I'm like, wow, this is so different, but it's really cool. Like, it's really interesting. I love the, that completely different approach. Is fascinating and enjoyable to me for at least periodically.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think that those I've run. I mean, it's really only Blades in the Dark games that I've run, like, or the Forge in the Dark games. So I've run a fair amount, not a fair amount, but I mean, I've run like maybe 6 or 7 sessions of Blades in the Dark, and I've run 1 or 2 sessions of Band of Blades, the new kind of like military focused one that is in beta right now. And the thing that's interesting about those games is the dynamic between player and DM is really fucking different than in a traditional role-playing game. I think that what the expectation of the dialogue between one and the other is very different, and I like it, but I think you really need to make it clear to players, look, this is how the back and forth is going to work on this, guys. This is different than what we are normally doing, where I'm the arbiter of kind of like what's happening in the world. I guess as a connector to that, to something else you said, I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are. Like the Force and Destiny, was that your first experience with the narrative dice?
Edge of the Empire. I played Edge of the Empire for maybe about 12 to 15 sessions in a campaign as a player before Force and Destiny.
Okay. So what were your, like, did you find that was a different, like a different experience than other role-playing games too?
Yeah, I think that's been described a little bit as some midpoint, well, not a midpoint, but in the middle, at least some point in the middle between traditional games and narrative games. And I think with it siding towards traditional, and I agree with that. I really liked them. They're a little. I would describe it as an advanced tool, the dice, because of the relentless granularity that comes out of those dice sometimes. Like, especially not so much like if they're trying to open a door, because that's typically in isolation. But if you're in combat, for example, like everyone's rolling, like it's roll, 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 roll. So those dice pools are just coming at you. And, you're just, as soon as you figured out what 2 successes, 3 threats, and a triumph mean, and you finally like dealt that out, the next guy's rolling with 4 threats, 2, you're like, oh my, the 5th time around, you're like almost, you're like, someone help me here. What's that one mean? So there's an aspect to it like that. So I like it. I mean, you got to bring, especially the GM, I've told people, I think you got to bring your A game. Like, that's not like some mail it in game. And you mentioned about, I think it was off camera, but you mentioned about finding players that are a good fit for, the game you're currently running. And I think that's a good example, because you really need players to pitch in, and not, it's you want to support different people's fun, where some are outspoken and some aren't. But like, I think that's a good example where it's helpful. Like, folks, I need you to come out, baby. Help me out. Like, your advantage, your players, your characters' advantages and triumphs. The game really puts it primarily in their auspices to figure those out. and I
Yeah.
need you to, because I'm going to run dry here,
Yeah, yeah, I know. I agree. I think that the oracular kind of experience of playing that, like of having dice results, right? Of you get that, and then it's a matter of there's that conversation of what does this mean? You know, what's
Yes.
happened in the scene is pretty cool with that. The thing that we found, one of my players mentioned, and I agree with him when we first started playing ours, because we played. Like a mashup of Edge of the Empire, Age of Rebellion, and Force and Destiny for about a year and a half.
Nice.
And one of the players said early on, he's like, it feels different than any other role playing game we play because there's no numbers. We're not doing math per se. They're just looking at, because you're just looking at symbols. Then it becomes, it's less about like, well, I got my 8 or I got my 15, so whatever else. It's just different, and I do feel that that's something that it's a different way of interacting with the success fail kind of mechanic. Yeah. And I really like that there's a second axis, right, with those, where you get the quality of success that comes from the threat, or what is it, the threat and advantage? That's what it's called in it?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So, and I like that because you can, like, the idea of having like a good success that's got some shitty stuff with it, or a failure that also provides some opportunity is very, it's not that it's what it does is it makes you realize how binary most other task resolution systems are. So that's another interesting thing. But something you said as well too about the crazy, especially in fast iterative kind of scenes where you're making lots and lots of dice rolls. I found it was really good for running fast narrative kind of like chases, or I had the strongest scene, I think, or one of the strongest scenes we had in our campaign with that was where a bunch of the players got in and then sort of onto this converted Star Destroyer that was like a bioweapons lab, and they all sort of spread out in different directions. So we were cutting back and forth between all the characters and just using sort of like one dice roll to sort of narrate what was happening for each of them in each of those scenes. It was really great then, because it was sort of like, there was points where the scenes could breathe between each other. Yeah. But I agree with you that like rolling the dice over and over and over again in round by round combat, it really highlights just how swingy that game can get when you get your dice pools bigger.
Yep. No question. And I totally agree with you that once you've played that, the binary nature of other games really hits you in the face. Like, I find myself with games that are far more binary thinking to myself, how am I going to do this? Like, even with games that I really like. So, for example, Shadow the Demon Lord. So, I'm a big fan of that game. I'm running it right now. So, I have nothing really but positive things to say about that game, but it's pretty binary. Like, the challenge rolls, even like the target number never even changes like that. It's very, and that's a positive in some, it's pretty, I like the simplicity of it. But I find myself frequently thinking, what would I do in given situations? I want to give myself the opportunity to have it more granular, because it's fun. Like, it's solid. And I mean, I think you can do it. You just have to say it. You just have to, of course, as the GM, structure the roll ahead of time. As someone makes a big roll and you're like, okay, folks, this is what we're going to do. You want to see not only if you get it open, but if you get it open quickly and you get it open quietly, here's what we'll do. And you lay it out, even though it's not strictly in the rules, everyone will be good with it as long as you just cleanly and quickly, nail out the parameters. Everyone's like, cool. And then they roll, so it can be done. But I find myself, I agree with you, and my mind goes to that direction with other games that are more binary.
And it's interesting that one of the things I've been thinking about lately in terms of like for the role playing games, and this was sort of evident in the by being a player again in your game, because I don't play very often, so it's rare that I'm like, when you're DMing, you're constantly engaged with the game because you're constantly going to either the players or the DM or the whatever else, and it reminding me of something that so there's a guy named I had to look it up here, Ty Crockett, who posts in the Genesis G+ community, and he plays a lot of games with his 2 sons, which is cool, and they do tons of fun stuff with that system. And Genesis is, for those listening at home who may not be familiar, Genesis is the effectively generic version of the same engine that drives the Star Wars role-playing games that Fantasy Flight has put out. He had played with his son on one, and they made a comment about when they were doing the same thing. They're playing a session with a couple extra players, and they were doing the like roll dice and then interpreting the dice stuff. And I guess his youngest son finally at one point was like, "Ugh, just make up your mind." Like,
right.
And
Right.
it's because I've been like, I've got a lot of experience with those more narrative games. And in the last like 6 months or so, I've really been exploring the OSR games, and the OSR games have so much less to them. And I've been focusing a lot on how it focuses the attention on what's happening at the table rather than on your character sheet. And that was from someone was making posted. They did this really interesting analysis of like how Ars Magica encourages you to play the game the way it's, or engage with the fiction the way that that the game intends. By building up a covenant and whatnot, then they prioritize that, and in the way they do experience points and whatnot. And they were talking about Call of Cthulhu, where because it's a horror, it doesn't really matter what, like, you don't need to have special powers or feats or whatever, or like any of those sort of like the sort of character building, theory crafting decisions you make in games like Pathfinder or D&D 5th or D&D 3rd, 4th, because what's important is what's happening in the fiction, right? And by having minimal amounts of rules to sort of clutter the board, it focuses the effort on the fiction. And that's the way I've been really thinking about these the OSR games, is that because if we're gonna chat in between sessions, we'll chat about the fiction rather than about whether you want to take this feat or that feat, right? Because that's but the thing that also I didn't appreciate was speed of resolution.
Oh yeah.
Like how fast you get through stuff, if we've been talking a lot about in my group about time, like how much time you spend at the table translating into what your game's about. And we about a year and a half ago were dabbling in 4th edition D&D again, and fights were like our whole session, right? Like it was just so if 80% to 90% of your screen time or your time at the table is spent on combat, your game is about combat, right? And there's an interesting trade-off between where like the depth you get from games like we're currently playing Pathfinder 2nd edition. Pathfinder 2nd edition is, I think, a pretty good, it's got a lot of great tactical decisions for characters to make in the moment, but what that sacrifices is if you've got a fairly big group, you're spending a lot of time with people making those decisions and talking through the mechanics part of it rather than just like speeding along and role playing.
Right.
Yeah. And I think, I agree. Yeah. So let's cycle back to the Genesis thing. Like, as much as that's interesting, and I really do like that, I think that combat, like I almost never used when I was running it, because I'm impatient as fuck. So it's a character flaw on my part, but I almost always either used nemesis or I used minions because I never used the mid grounds because I didn't feel it was terribly interesting. And same thing, to be honest, for the Conan game. Conan has a similar 3-tier thing. There's minions, there's toughened, and then there's, I think it's called nemesis as well. I never use those mid-range guys because it's not, it becomes too much like Flintstones boxing, where it's like whack, 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 whack. Okay, you're down.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's like it. I haven't seen that discussed in these narrative dice thing or the narrative games, narrative dice games, I should say, like the 2D20 system or the other one. But I think that's an important consideration to, like, if your game is about maximizing story and making every dice result interesting. I wonder if it's important then to make sure that your combats have, like, every single time you're engaging in combat, making it consequential. Right. So it's either playing up the theme of them being badasses blazing their way through a bunch of stormtroopers, or playing up like, oh fuck, we're fighting Darth Vader right now.
Right. And I suppose if you, no, it's a good point. That's a good point. And I wonder if you could use, my mind goes to, if you use those middle guys who are maybe too well balanced with the PC, I'm wondering if it's because it's too well balanced with the PCs on a resolution timing basis. As you said, the whack, 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 whether something else could be introduced to make those still useful, like environment. So you have a clock, so even though it's whack, whack, okay, guys, you can keep doing this, but that ship is still coming, that kind of thing, where they're forced, despite despite that factor, there's something else coming in that mixes it up, maybe something like that.
Yeah. No, that's true. Actually, I'm running. The reason I wanted to pick your brain about this too is because I'm getting back. I've got a charity session I got to run. Not got to. I get to run in about a week's time for Fantasy Flight Star Wars. So it's the first time diving back into that. Before we leave this topic, I wanted to ask you as well too whether you had any house rules that you were using for the dice or for the dice pools for Force and Destiny.
I don't think we do. I mean, the only thing I'm going to mention that isn't so the answer is no. If something comes to mind, I will change my answer. But obviously, nothing big or it would come to mind. Only thing I will say about that is I have found on this topic of time for resolution on Star Wars FFG, it has been a huge boon to play online because I've played in person and I've played online, and so we play over Roll20. And so when you roll the dice, so it instantly tallies those dice. Oh, that is big. Like I played in person and we played for a little while and I was fine at it. We were all, calculating adults, not a big deal. But two factors. One, there's still a little bit of that, wait. Oh no, wait, this kind of thing. And two, there's a few mistakes. So you go like, oh, I got 2 successes, and they're going, okay. So what happens? Oh, wait, no. I got 3 successes. That whole thing. Like, okay. Kevin, take a breath. What did you get? This kind of a thing. Whereas with Roll20, that's done. There's none of that. This is what you got. End of story. And it's instant. And it shows you the dice you rolled, which is a big deal. It's in everyone's face. The results are in everyone's face. And what you rolled, the dice pool's in everyone's face. Because I would say, well, there's no calculation rules because Roll20 is doing that for you. So all the human errors are in the dice pool. So you go, hey, Andrew, you needed to roll 1 more blue die there. You should have gotten an extra boost. And he goes, oh, that's right. And everyone knows that because it's right in your face. The dice pool is shown rather than over in Andrew's corner, where people are rolling in their own area or something. And you're like, wait, what did you roll? There's none of that. Yeah. That's big for that game in particular. I find that huge. And you never forget a failure when a despair hits, or a success when a triumph hits. You're supposed to add 1 when those hit, and that's just done. It's just done. Like you don't even have to. Those are nice. That's big.
Well, that's a good point point to transition into talking about online gaming because I agree with you. Like I mean in particular for games that require a lot of dice pools or just big batches of dice, like Hero System or Champions and Shadowrun, like fourth and fifth edition Shadowrun. Yeah. They're not, to my mind, they're not fucking playable unless you're, unless you're using a dice roller.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I mean, Champions less so because task resolution only requires 3 dice. It's just effects require more dice, but fucking Shadowrun, like, good God. 10 to 15 dice you're rolling and you're looking for specific 5s and 6s, like.
Right. You have to be, I mean, it's a game that I think is focused more on the tactical and that figures into the dice. They don't mind that. Whereas, obviously Powered by the Apocalypse would never go for that. Like that's never going to be permitted in that area, that gaming space, that.
No, there was an interesting Twitter chain that was going around today by, I remember his name, Zach Sabbath, the guy who does D&D with porn stars, I think. Yep. He had an interesting thing where it was talking about, someone had posted some academic article or like quasi academic article about like, narrative games versus MMOs, like basically it was like OSR play versus like narrative games. And it was very slanted heavily in favor of the narrative games. And the one thing that I find with those narrative games is, and I guess have you played any Powered by the Apocalypse games yet?
I have. I've played. I mean, I've probably, but not many. I mean, probably 3. I've been a player in 3 or 4 sessions, I would say.
Okay, so see if you agree with me on this. I love, in theory, the gamifying so many parts of a game. Like Blades in the Dark is awesome. I love that the mechanics. I love the game, but I feel like the mechanics are consistently intruding. You are never forgetting that you're playing a game because so much of it is boil down to, this is how you're playing this game, and here's the parameters of the game, and we're always using this to do that. And like, there's lots of narrative freedom within that, but it is always going to boil down to rolling a couple dice and whatever. And then there's going to be specific prescribed results from that will have game mechanic effects as well.
Yep.
That is, to me, a lot less immersive than something like basic D&D or Labyrinth Lord or something like a real old school style game where you really can just get lost in the, what's going on.
Yeah.
Because not so much of the experience is circumscribed by the game mechanics.
Yeah.
There's apart from a reaction roll, there's very little else that's going on when you're interacting with an NPC, and that reaction roll is really just setting a baseline for you role playing with that NPC.
Yep.
So yeah, so I don't know. I mean, like, it depends on what you're going for too, right? Like, if you have more game oriented people, I think those games do facilitate that kind of interaction. Whereas you just end up doing that on your own. Like, if you have a good DM, if you have a good group, you're going to be role playing, but it's going to be less fenced in on those narrative games.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I mean, Apocalypse World, and I think that one is the, as far as off the top of my head, I mean, it's the quintessential where the system is the least in the way. And that's, to state it that way actually is not the best, because it sounds like the system's the problem. And for a lot of games, that's not the case for me, because I like the FFG Star Wars is a good example where the system is pretty significant. Like, it's definitely, it's a thing,
Yep.
But I love it. I find that it drives the story. While I agree that it definitely is more in your, it's definitely more front and center, and you have to think about it. And what are these two advantages versus one advantage? There's no doubt there's a fair amount of that, but I find it enjoyable. I find that act enjoyable. Some won't, obviously it's going to be a personal preference thing.
Yeah.
But so the system, I'm definitely not against system. I like crunchy. I like pretty. In fact, my weak spot in games, I've found, I like all sorts of games. My primary weak spot is extremely deep settings with a decent amount of crunch that supports it. So like Legends of the Five Rings, Warhammer 40,000 RPGs. Star Wars, these are all like, so the setting goes on for days. So the setting's just unlimited. Like, there's ridiculous amounts of setting provided. Yep. And then you have a pretty decent amount of crunch that's plugged into that setting, at least reasonably well to very well, to support all that setting. And those are the systems I find myself gravitating to the most.
Yeah, it's, what I've been in the last 3 weeks or so, I've actually found myself back at one of my early loves, which is GURPS. Because like I've run GURPS for quite a few years, like for a good long time. GURPS was my go-to system. And I purchased Dungeon Fantasy when it came out, like the powered by GURPS, fantasy thing. And at first I was like, whoa, this is too much game, and I'm not going to look at it. And then I started in the last little while, I've been thinking about what game would facilitate the needs of my group and what I want to run, and one of the things with those more stripped down games like, Adventure Conquer King or Labyrinth Lord or, Osric or AD&D or D&D or whatnot. I have players who just like, there's not enough game there for them to really give a shit, because especially with the theory crafting part, like building their characters.
Yes.
But I like, so I've been looking at GURPS again. And the thing that I really, what I like about that system in particular is that it is, I think, probably the most intuitive system of any game I've ever run, because things mechanically happen in game the way you would expect them to, right? Like rules of, I'm not sure how much, if any, GURPS you've played, but like GURPS, when you take damage, you have a shock value. So you'll take a penalty to your next dice roll.
So the most simulationist,
yeah, it's absolutely the most simulationist, and that can be a problem as well too. It can grind combat rounds last 1 second. So people who are new to the system, yeah. So there's a lot of like, once people get into the swing of it, it gets a lot better, because people are like, I'm gonna draw my weapon, and then they'll know it's someone else's turn. They're not thinking like, well, what else can I do? You're like, one Mississippi. What?
Interesting.
That's what you can do.
Right.
So
I pull my fist back.
yeah, exactly. Like, you know, it's, you can, like, I'm gonna, you know, if you want to run an attack, you can do that. But one Mississippi, like, it's not gonna be the most accurate strike. But what Dungeon Fantasy does is it gives you powerful enough characters so you can really do some badass, you know, superhero shit. But
yeah,
it remains the fact that like a knife always will be a threat, because if you get fucking stabbed with a knife, that, you know, that will cause a lot of shock and pain and not heal, you know, stuff you can't slough off. If you fall 30 feet, you're gonna be fucked up, like, you know. So but the reason so setting aside the system stuff, I think I like that because it simulates the sort of like reality that I want from this OSR type of play, where like slogging through the you know, the Barrowmoor is exhausting, right? Or is, you know, carrying back loads of treasure. It's not a matter of like a video game where you just throw shit in and it's no problem. Like, you got to plan for this stuff ahead of time. If you didn't bring enough sacks to carry all this shit, well, I guess you have to come back again, you know?
Right. Yep.
But the thing that I like is advancement, because regular advancement is another big thing that is a problem I find in OSR games, because it's very hard to do milestone advancements. Like the Fantasy Flight Star Wars games are fucking awesome for being able to just dole out regular XP and the players feel like there's a regular sense of accomplishment, right?
Yeah.
Because there's constantly new stuff you can either buy or be saving up for really cool stuff as you're, you know, spending your stuff. The Iron Kingdoms role-playing game is very much like that too, where you're every session or every 2 sessions, you're going to be able to see some kind of mechanical, meaningful change to your character. Other games like the D&D, Pathfinder, it's hard to do that, to be able to give them ways of going back to that character design part of the game and engage with that without just giving them new levels.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't have as much. I don't have as much experience, now that you're bringing it up, with level games. And I think the only level game, you know, just off the top of my head here, that I think of, like, so Shadow the Demon Lord, but that eliminates it because everyone levels as a group. So it just takes it just, you know, you're not doling out anything at the end. You know, at a milestone, everyone goes up, proceed. You know, it's which I'm a big fan of, actually. I mean, I like both. It depends on what you're after, right? Because as you said, Star Wars, it's great. You know, it's classic. It's granular, and they're, especially in Force and Destiny, when not only do you have skills and talents, but you also have force powers. Like, the stuff you can spend it on, there's way too much you can spend it on. And if you enjoy that, awesome. You're playing the right game, you know, because it's granular. Get in there and enjoy, you know, get your arms in there. But if you're not into that, then like Shadow the Demon Lord, everyone goes up, you know, there's no fuss, no muss. It also deals well with new players and ongoing games. You always have that question of where, I always have that question of where to start them. On the one hand, you don't want them to be too far behind. But on the other hand, there's something in me that wants the other players there's still to be something that the old players feel like, you know, they earn those points. And I don't want to just, hand this guy 5,000 experience points. There's something in there that I've never quite solved, you know, for it to be perfect.
It's interesting. It's interesting you mentioned that, because I've had that happen. I've had that discussion with one of my players in one of our recent games and in our Barrow Maze campaign. So for those listening at home, Sean knows because Sean's played in this game, but I'm running the Pathfinder 2nd Edition playtest as a OSR game, where I'm adopting many of the sensibilities and the some of the rules actually from old school games to make it more of that kind of like sandbox style play, where you're not necessarily the heroes of the story. It's just, you know, and one of the things with that OSR style play is like you get rewards for playing. The more you play, the more XP you gain. There is a much more transparent sort of like incentivizing of certain types of behaviors. Getting loot is more XP than killing things, like 4 times as much. So that is incentivized. That exploration role playing gives you more XP than just killing things. If you're engaging things and killing things, that's fun, but you don't get I've actually like quartered the XP you get from doing that in this to incentivize that other style of play. And that's the way OSR games played. And then what I also allowed is everyone to level up at like, if a player has played more, their character's going to advance more, and then to sort of what I thought was to try and hit that balance in between is to say, okay, well, if you have showed up, like if you're only able to attend 1 out of 4 sessions and your character is lower level than the others, you're going to gain a multiple of XP equal to the difference between the levels plus 1. So if you're 1 level below, you'll gain double XP. If you're 2 levels below, you'll gain 3 times XP. So it gives you a real chance to catch up, but you're not, it's not robbing the player characters or the guys who are playing of anything. You're not taking anything away from them. And the player was feeling, well, no, this is not fair to the players. I mean, just because I can't show up more often, why should I be penalized? And that's a fair enough game. And what it sort of boiled down to is that player was using an analogy of, like, he said, well, I play in a dodgeball team, but I don't lose points because of whatever. And I'm like, well, role-playing's not playing dodgeball. At least this campaign, I'm not doing that. It's not friends getting together to just do that activity. That's part of it, but that's not the only thing. There's also the in-world simulation that we're all engaging with too. And just because the players are all friends, it doesn't mean that the characters will all share loot together. There's not going to be a guild. And that's what sort of that player was trying to push towards, was that they were going to set up a guild bank and they were going to do all this stuff. Well, basically, yeah, that's what it was. And then, like, when they started talking about union, I'm like, all right, well, if that's what you're doing, then the local, they're going to tax you guys. Because, as soon as you start trying to turn this into a business enterprise within an existing political structure, they're going to fucking tax you. And it wasn't to deter. It's just that was part of the that particular game. My job in that game is for the world to respond to whatever the players are doing, because that increases the verisimilitude of it and whatever.
Right. Great.
Yeah. But anyway, but the thing is that player was seeing it as, no, this is why I'm playing. It's just friends playing. So I shouldn't be penalized to be lower level just because I can't make it as often because of life commitments. Whereas we were saying, well, no, this is part of the flavor of the setting, right? And you're already getting that. And I think there are other players who are like, well, look, we know that death is a thing in this campaign. Every time we go out to gain XP, we're risking losing our characters that we've invested time and effort into and whatever. So why should you get to ride on our coattails completely? So, and the players who were higher level, they weren't saying that outright, but they were pretty much fucking saying that.
Right.
So yeah, it is. I agree. Like and I guess just on a mechanical, what I always used to say in the first time I ran fifth, because fifth with bounded accuracy, it's easier to say, like, no, you don't need to all be the same level. Like the difference between a third level character and a fifth level character is not such a catastrophic difference, except for spells, I guess. But what I said there was, I didn't want players, like, if players are absent from the table for a significant length of time, they're going to take time to remember how to play their characters. And I don't want to make that harder by adding in a bunch of new abilities that you've never used at the table. Right? Like if I'm sure you've run a lot of one-shots. I'm like, the difference between how much effort it is at the start and how clunky it is at the start playing third level characters in a one-shot versus 12th level characters in a one-shot.
Oh yeah.
Right. Yep. Or whatever the equivalent is in non-level based games. But
no, those are good. I mean, those are good points. I haven't. That's interesting hearing such a let's see, what's the word? Such a I mean, it's good that player had such a direct communication with you about actually a viewpoint I haven't actually run into. At least I haven't run into it stated as plainly, that he felt strongly that he should be at the same level, or at least, pretty darn close, despite his attendance. Because everything I have to say, I mean, I've always been on the opposite side of that discussion, but I don't look at it as a penalty. I look at it as rewarding players for being there. I mean, like these guys, and if you can't, you can't. This is obviously not about judgment of a human being. Like, that's obviously ridiculous. Marriage and kids and jobs, we all get that. At the very same time, you want to reward those folks that are there every time. Like, that's something that ought to be acknowledged. And you just can't throw that away. So I think on the human level, do you get on Pete's case that he missed the last 2 sessions? No, you don't. But do you give him the exact same XP? No. I mean, you don't, so both exist at the very same time.
No, and that's like the double XP was as good of a bone as I was willing to throw to, or double or triple or whatever, to these other players, because I don't want them to, that particular game. It does, like, there is a appreciable difference if you get to a 3 or 4 level gap. They're really existing in different worlds because of
Yes.
the way the math
Right.
works in that game.
Yep.
But I mean, that we have not hit that problem yet. Everybody, I think all the characters are at a minimum level 3 in that, and the highest level is level 4, and then new characters will come in at probably 2, I think. But in any event, what that will what that allows is for the characters to, from my perspective, what I was thinking is that, like, well, you get to get supercharged, like you're dinging every time you play a session for the first little bit until you get caught up. So that's great.
Yeah.
And all that the player could see was that, well, this isn't fair. I mean, they're at that level. I'm like, yeah, but you weren't there. Like your character wasn't there. Your character didn't take the risk that these characters are feeling in this game. If I was playing a game like, I contrast that with Shadow the Demon Lord, where it is a brutal and can be a very lethal game, but it is a narrative game.
Yeah.
You know, like with a set level bands that you're hitting.
Yeah.
That, okay, now we're at this point in the story, now you're this level. That's a narrative based game, right? Like that's not, I really love, I'm with you. I love Shadow of the Demon Lord. It's a great game, but I've been trying to struggle with how I would run that as a sandbox, because you need to have, like, part of the sandbox is you incentivize people going out and facing that danger, because that's how they get loot to help make themselves more powerful. That's also how they gain XP, primarily is through loot. So the danger, the traps and the monsters and all that other shit, that's peripheral to them getting, trying to achieve their goals.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I
But
mean, since it's so heavily dependent on milestones, I think I mean, I see it as, the difficulty in defining milestones when you're in a sandbox, right? That's pretty much, I hear you. It seems solvable. You know what? So here's a thought. What about, on that note? So I'm currently playing, the main campaign I'm in as a player right now is Invisible Sun.
Oh, yep.
And that game is, let's see, it's got some striking design choices, and one of the most striking is its integration. So it's a intrinsically sandbox game, but it approaches it a very deliberate, I'm going to use the word deliberate way than I've ever seen. Part of the character generation is your story arcs, which I'm not going to say that clearly is not unique, but it's more integrated than I've seen before. So like, I don't believe there's going to be any adventures released for it. So that's how it's hardcore in this way. So, like the GM is supposed to, everyone's supposed to have these story arcs, and those story arcs have a mechanical structure within the game. Like there's, it gives you ideas of story arcs, and everyone's discussing their story arcs. And then you've got to meld those for the first session and then proceed. And I'm thinking that for your example of Shadow of the Demon Lord, perhaps you make the players come up with their own story arc, their own, the general story arc of their character. So what's your character about? What are they trying to achieve? And then you base those milestones. The only problem with that is that's kind of individualistic. Those are individual. That would call for individual milestones. Now that I think about it, in Shadow of the Demon Lord, their leveling system is intrinsically group milestone based. Where the group achieves something and everyone goes up. And what I'm talking about, what I'm brainstorming about right this minute, is using individual story arc milestones, which now that I think about it, might be a conflict, because Shadow of the Demon Lord, everyone goes up.
Well, I think one of the things is, by having a unified, when there's only one path to, when there's only one road to Rome, right? Or that's not a saying, but you know what I mean? Like, there's only one route to your destination. Then that's the only route you take, right? So if all you can gain is XP, then that's what you do, is you chase XP. In our Barrow Maze campaign, like, part of the Barrow Maze campaign is to try out some things in Sandbox to see what's going to work for the next campaign I'm going to run. And I'm using a Renown system as sort of an appendage to that. So in addition to exploring the Barrow Maze and, like, getting treasure and whatever else, the players can also interact with different factions. And I sent them a chart Oh, 1 second here. I think we're having. Oh, we're back. Okay. The stream was sort of logged up or clogged up there for a sec. What I sent them was a series of factions, and then like rated each from 1 to 50 renown, and then you got set rewards, and you could also get more contacts and ask for favors and shit like that as you went up in the renown. Right. It's completely unrelated to XP, but I was just curious to see if the players were going to engage with that, like by putting these things out there as like, okay, here's what you can do. And I've got 2 players now who are chasing renown with their characters because they've seen that and been like, oh, fuck, I want to do this stuff. I'm going to make, potions for the Church of St. Yig because that's going to help them out. Yep. And that might be something you could do as well, is that if there is non-mechanical bonuses, or at least non-level level advancement bonuses that are story-based, that would be an interesting way of doing that. So you could have like the renown thing as being like, this is how you're interacting with the world. It's at large, beyond just adventuring and gaining XP and whatnot is how you gain in power. And then you could also provide a different incentive structure for specific arcs. And in a sandbox, you choose what you're doing at any given session. So the players, if a player is a real role-playing heavy or, backstory invested character, they could engage with that part of the game. One interesting thing that I've been doing in this campaign too is, are you familiar with the term blue booking?
Give me more.
Okay, so blue booking comes from a guy named Aaron Alston. He's unfortunately passed away now, but Aaron Alston was a guy who wrote he originally was a reviewer for Steve Jackson games, and then he became a writer for Champions for a very long time, or for Hero games. He wrote a bunch of the basic D&D books, like the Grand Duchy of Karameikos. I know you weren't really much of a D&D player, but there's a bunch of sort of signature D&D bits that he wrote. But he also wrote this source book for Champions called Strike Force. And basically what it was an analysis of what he did in his long-term Champions campaign. He had a Champions campaign that lasted like 17 or something like 20 or 22 years or something like that. It was a ridiculous length of time. Rotating cast of players and stuff like that, but still a consistent world. And one of the things he introduced early on was blue booking, which was basically like to handle those individualistic role-playing encounters between player and DM that's just focused on that character, rather than wasting everyone's time at the table doing that. They had a book, like those old exam booklets, and they'd write down the scenes and they'd exchange it back and forth with the DM, and they would role-play out some of those things in there. With email and whatnot, it's a lot easier now, but what I've recently set up for the Barrow Maze campaign is a Google Plus community. And it's crazy how much the players have taken to that, and like for planning, for role playing. And we had a character death recently in the campaign, and then I had to go. I was away for a retreat on the weekend, and I logged on and found that like a bunch of my players were fucking posting back and forth in character about this and how their characters were reacting. And that might be,
that's cool.
If you had that story focused way, like the story focused rewards that weren't just keyed to XP, that would be a way for the players to engage with the fiction and gain tangible rewards in between sessions too.
And you used a Google community, you say, for that? Google Plus community?
Yeah.
Nice. So it's a good idea. And I've that notion of keeping the game active in between sessions, is an old one. That's good to hear. So this Invisible Sun has some interesting. There's one other thing I was going to bring up, and then what you just said. So we use, we use a Slack channel, for communication in between sessions, which has worked really well. It has a free version for anyone who wants to check it out for their gaming. That's worked really well, and I will. And the game has a built-in part of it. So most games say, okay, there's a tactical time phase, and then there's a narrative time phase. And you use tactical for combat's the most common, and narrative is for times when it doesn't matter and you're interacting with NPCs. Well, Invisible Sun adds one more called development phase, and that is specifically for side sessions or side scenes in between sessions. And once again, they've taken something that we've all thought about, but they've integrated it in the game and putting mechanics on it so that it happens more. Like, this is happening. Kids, this is happening. So figure it out. This is how you're going to do it. You're going to use, it has all sorts of physical stuff. So you're going to use the Sooth deck in a certain way. So it really tries to integrate something that was already in gaming, like we're talking about, and making it really part of the game. Lastly, I was going to say before I forget, another interesting thought for your sandbox ideas is that it calls for, at the end of every session, you go around the table fairly briefly and have every player concisely explain how they thought their character proceeded or didn't in their story arcs that session. So that really puts the little things like that are interesting because they really put the focus. Like, what do you want your game focused on? What do you want your players focused on? Well, if your characters have to come up with like, so what did you do about your story arc this session? And they go, nothing. Like they can't think of anything, like, hello, it really brings the focus back. And then that's when the GM is supposed to reward those, that's a good point. You did get that piece of information. And then they physically hand a chit or a token or whatever, basically an XP of some kind to the player. So really keeping that focus on story arcs, which I think is really interesting for Sandbox.
Well, and I think that's one of the things I've learned from the Forge in the Dark games is by making it transparent what you're rewarding. And that's sort of what the conversation that chain that was talking about Ars Magica. It was also talking about the difference in XP incentives between old school D&D and modern D&D, and that's really what started me down this rabbit hole of OSR play. Was how in modern D&D the only source of XP really is killing stuff. Right, is killing, defeating things, and whatever. There's now, I mean, like there's the 3 pillars in 5th edition D&D with exploration, role playing, and combat. But that's really, I mean, still the primary source of XP is killing shit. Previous versions of D&D, the primary source of XP was loot. Your biggest source of XP was getting the shit out. So you didn't have to fight the dragon. You had to trick it, grab its stuff, and get the fuck out of there.
Yep.
And that. Seeing how the Power by the Apocalypse and Forge in the Dark games do it, where you can look at your character sheet and you've checked off if you've done X or Y or whatever, you played your character in an aggressive way because he's aggressive. You just check off that box. If you're able to answer yes, you get XP for that. Nice. And that's, I think, a smart way of doing it is just like you say, like by being mindful of specifically what you're rewarding. That's that's a way to encourage the players to, if they are chasing after rewards, to get them to do make the game about what you want to make it about. Right. I've recently started specifically rewarding people for going to the Barrowmoor. Every time you go to the Barrowmoor, you get 30 XP.
Yep.
Regardless of whatever you end up doing there, so that incentivizes that particular type of play rather than fucking around in town.
It's a great thought, and it really it hits me in my Force and Destiny too, because that's the ongoing campaign I'm running, and that there's a good discussion we had about that game because it's Star Wars, so it's space opera, but that game interestingly has taken a long procedural turn, and so the players I've kind of been thinking about this, like I don't mind it, I'm enjoying it. And as GM, I'm like, is everyone enjoying this? Like, because this isn't really space opera. So, so I'm mindful, as I think one of the best answers I've heard for Rule 0 is, which there's several answers to that. But one of my favorites is Rule 0 is genre. So, genre. If you're following the genre, you're probably okay, kind of a thing. Yeah. So I'm like, this isn't really, this isn't Han Solo in that security area, saying, we're okay here. How are you? Oh, hell, and shooting it and going, we're going to have visitors. That's space opera. Like, that's how they solve problems half the time, was rushing into the room, or even the Jedi, which are more like, calm, but they calmly go into the room and solve the issue. But they don't have vast hour-long planning sessions to do it.
No.
They just kind of go. And so we've gotten very procedural, and the players, I swear to you, the players drove this, and I'm like, did I do this? Like, I don't think it was me. So I've been trying to actually kind of speed it up, but it's been challenging, and so I'm kind of in my own situation here.
Can I make a suggestion there? And this is something I stole from Blades in the Dark. Blades in the Dark embraces the idea of flashbacks, and because they say, like, look, the players are not career criminals who have master skills and whatever, so we can assume that even though the player characters didn't think of it, the characters, or the players didn't think of it, the characters would have. Characters would have been mindful. They would have been smart enough to plan ahead or whatever else. And especially when I was doing like heist stuff in our Star Wars games, I would just be like, okay, spend a force point. You can add a backstory, make a change to the scene to do a flashback. So that way it gets around the Shadowrun problem, which is you spend 3 hours fucking planning something, and then 3 seconds into the plan, it goes out the fucking window.
Right. Yeah, I think Gumshoe uses preparedness skill for that, and I think Star Wars actually calls, if I remember correctly, they use vigilance for that. I think it's actually stated in the rules you can use vigilance for, would my character have brought an extra robe? And if it's, I mean, if it's obvious, you give it to him, but if it's kind of 50-50, well, give me a vigilance. Let's see how on your toes you were. So I completely agree with that. I'm all for that. I don't think it was me, but they're like, they got to this planet and they said, and there's a MacGuffin, and they're like, okay, we're going to get jobs at this institution that's got the MacGuffin. And I'm like, you're going to get jobs. I'm like, did Obi-Wan ever get a job? So I'm good with it. I mean, it's been fun. There's been aspects of it that I think have been really cool, but I'm just worried about everyone else. Like, is everyone else good with this? Because this is not swinging the rope with Princess Leia across the so I've got my own situation going on with that, but it's a good subject.
That's funny. Yeah, that's it's as a last aside on this. That's actually why I took out. There's the slicing option as one of the piloting things you can do, where you're hacking the other whatever's computer. Like, that's a fucking legacy of the West End Games edition, which was which came out around in a heyday of cyberpunk. Okay. And like I told the players, I'm like, look, guys, when in any of the fucking fiction have you ever seen Luke tell R2 to hack the fucking tide, or whatever? Because that's not Star Wars. Like, it's never fucking happened, so we're not having that in the game. It's so stupid.
Yeah. I hear you.
Yeah. So let's talk about conventions, because that's what I'm interested in hearing what your experience was with it. So from our conversations before we went live and before we played, or rather before we started recording this, you've been involved with in-person gaming conventions before, right?
Yes. So harkening back to the beginning of our conversation, in 2012 was when I, fatefully found that shelf of Dark Heresy in the San Francisco gaming store. Well, just after that, I've bitten hard, and I'm like, how do I even go about this? Like, it was weird. It was funny. As an adult, I'm like, so adults do this apparently, and how do I so I actually looked on Craigslist, in desperation in a sense, and found one, and there he was. There's a guy that was running a Call of Cthulhu game and said, contact me. Briefly, I did that. We started playing, some crazy middle of the night, like Call of Cthulhu game, super fun. But it was him that said, pretty quickly into that game, he said, hey, by the way, Sean, there's actually conventions in the area that do this. And I'm like, seriously? And he's like, yeah, I'm going to one in San Ramon. It's like, it's just on the other side of the bay. If you're interested, I'm going there Saturday. I'm like, how can I not do this? So I'm like, I'm going to go check this out. Well, I mean, so once again, the rest is history. I mean, I could go on the road selling any con, but physical cons especially. I mean, I was like, this is crazy. This is a drug right here. I have found my non-narcotic drug, because it is just, and it only gets better, because the more you go, the more people you know. Yeah. And a huge part of this industry, or this hobby, of course, is the social aspect. Even though we talk about games, the people are a huge part of it. And so these cons are really focused on those are basically reunions. As often as the more you go, it's a reunion, because you're like, Pete, no way. What have you been up to? What are you playing? That
Yeah.
is it's awesome. I'm so yes, and I am I really enjoy physical cons.
Okay. So the con that we both played and ran games at recently was the Nerds International Virtual Con, the second con. It was a second annual one, I guess now.
I believe actually their first was earlier this year, so it's more than annual,
Oh,
but
okay.
it's supposed to be a regular anyway, regular.
Okay. Was this your first online con?
It was as far as running a game. So I've played in games I've played in probably a handful or two, like EtherCon, VirtuaCon, Roll20Con, FGCon.
Oh wow.
Probably yeah, as a player, a fair
Yeah.
amount of player.
So, but this was the first one you ran something at.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm not going to ask how the game differed this time because that's just fucking self-serving because you played in my game. So
Yeah, it was fantastic.
it was terrible. Fucking DM was so unfair, killing
What
all the
hat?
henchmen.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm more interested in is the DMing because my reluctance to getting involved with the cons before is part of what we talked about before we went live, right? Like one of the big things about gaming and about being a dungeon master is sort of shepherding the group as well too, or not shepherding, but not maintaining, preserving. Well, I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for here is I don't know, like a gaming group, like a regular gaming group, a persisting one, is very much like a work relationship, right? Or like a work environment where fit is a big thing. Like it's okay to have people with very different personalities and different expectations of what they and also different things they get out of gaming, different things that the different reasons they have for it. And the DM is making sure that that all sort of works together and that the game you're providing services all that and that you're having fun doing that, right?
Yes.
And so you've only recently come back to gaming, but like I've got guys in my gaming group who I've known since like grade 2. You know, like we've been friends forever, and then there's other friends we've met through along the way, and I brought them into the group. But it's a couple of friends are people who I've played with for forever in my regular group, and part of that, that familiarity, and you sort of learn each other's shorthand and what will appeal to certain people and what won't, and how to, as a DM, how to play to that group and to enjoy the interaction and what the players are doing in the group. So my reluctance initially was every horror story I'd ever heard about convention games where like someone just basically blows up the session, right? And that was my reluctance. And you had very kindly sent me a list of a bunch of the available cons online. And then a year went by and I didn't sign up. But this was my first time diving in as a DM. What were your feelings about diving in as a DM for this one?
Well, first of all, props for jumping in with both feet and just running one. Even though, I mean, you have a channel, it's not like crazy for you, but at the same time, it matters. It's meaningful because, I mean, when I got back into the hobby, I jumped in and ran that Dark Heresy for 3 years, and it was fantastic. So half of it is just doing it. Just go do it. And I'm saying that to myself about running a game at this virtual con finally. Because, like, dude, just go do it, for the love of man, this kind of thing. So you bring up an interesting point, Kevin, about people's different experiences, and I will even compare it to something else in gaming, and that is like I got into online gaming, gaming online in 2013. So, I mean, and the vast majority of the games I run are online, and yet I will talk to a friend that's a hardcore gamer that I know in person. He's a person in my area, and we'll be chatting, and I'll go, oh, you should consider running that online. And he's like, oh, running that online, and like, is it some concept to him? And I'm like, that is so interesting, because to me, that's almost my default. For this hardcore gamer buddy of mine, that's like some weird, like new experience. So it's so interesting of different players, different experiences.
Totally.
And you bring up another one where, so for me, playing with strangers is like normal. Like that's just part of my deal. Because when at a physical con, that is standard. You can't just, well, you can, but you typically don't just game with buddies at a con. You're going there to interact with all the participants, even if you know a lot of people, you certainly don't know everybody. And so it's just standard. So first of all, it's really interesting. This is a great question. Um, I think it's, you just don't really worry about it. I mean, you just kind of push through. You can't, at a public game, you really can't. And I'm talking about I should say a one shot, because when I've taken a player from the public in an ongoing campaign of mine, so I'm replacing a player in a long running campaign, and I'm open to players from the public, by posting it online. That's maybe a little bit different. And I have vetted those players by having a call just like this. And I've actually eliminated people, which is a little, and really those people kind of eliminate themselves, I should say. Like in my experience, when I can think of one guy in particular that I thought he was coming in, it seemed perfect, and we jumped on a call, and he goes, I don't think this is going to work. And I'm like, perfect, no problem, take care. So it's a self-vetting thing. So that's different. But in a public one shot, you're not doing any vetting. In the door they come, and you run the game. And I think there's probably a little bit different skill set, not radically, but a little, because for one thing, I think part of it is the all powerful, all important subject of expectations. So your own expectations, their expectations. This is a person you do not have a relationship with. There are no there are some baked in expectations, maybe because of the genre you're playing, of course. But I think, the way the GM handles it, I think there's something to it, that it's a little different. These are people you've never met before, or at least probably substantially. And I think there's a tolerance that's called for. Like you got to roll with stuff. Like, in your own crusty group, you know what to expect, and it's all people that, and people don't do this or that. And they don't, because they haven't done it for the 5 years you've been gaming. But in a public game, who knows? And you just roll with it. You just like, and you got to do that thing sometimes where one guy's still talking, and you go, "Hey, Pete, what do you do?" You gotta, and it's okay. Yep. It's okay. You just have little techniques to handle it. As GMs do, you got that little stuff you do to make sure everyone's or someone's not talking or talking too much or whatever. You just roll with it, and if another player is annoyed, you got to handle that too. Like, no, that's cool. What you just roll with it.
So, you ran Cypher,
right?
The Cypher one shot assault on Singularity Base, right? Part of that pre-gen adventure. Apart from your disruptive Jedi player, how did you feel it went?
Yeah, you were awesome. I think it went well. I was really happy with that. One interesting aspect of that I'll mention is that and this is really funny from, once again, individual player perspectives, because the only way I'd experienced that game, ironically for me, was in person. So the vast majority of my running is online. This game is completely fish out of water in this sense, because the only way I interacted with this one shot, was running it in person. And so, which is so weird for me. And so now I'm jumping on running this online, and it's really well suited for online, because this particular scenario is very tactical, as you'll recall. So, there's this notion of, wandering through a town doing whatever you want. That's not this scenario. This is a commando team that's like, doesn't have to be all combat, but I mean, it's really almost all tactical. It's just the way it is, this particular scenario. So, online is very good at tactical. It excels at a map and visuals and distances and like who can see what, really getting into the granularity of the tactical. Roll20 is just all over that. And so I was looking forward to interacting with this scenario that I'd run multiple times in person. I wanted to interact with it with the venue, the medium, I should say, with the medium that I'm most familiar with. So that was cool to me. That was a cool aspect of it, of seeing you guys interact with it online, since it's such a tactical scenario. But I think it went great.
If you had to do the same scenario again, same group of players, what changes would you have made?
Well, so first of all, I would, One aspect of, I think, running a game that I've had conversations with buddies about that I think are underappreciated, are logistics. Like most conversations at GMing, I think, are about the game, which is perfectly natural. That's what we care about, and that's what we've been talking about. But there's also I have some friends that are not as strong in the logistics part of running a game. So like a buddy running a campaign, like it's a little chaotic, not in the game, but out of the game. Like, are we playing or what's going on? That part there, and it's consistent, not once. Anyone can have an off week or an off month and like, sorry, my work blew up. That happens. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a consistent pattern of like, what's going on? Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
I lost my train of thought. What was the question?
Well, I'll jump onto that. And I totally
got it.
Go ahead.
So I started way too late. So we jumped into this game and so I've got like, 25 things in my mind. And I'm a little curious. I've got this chief concern because public one-shots are notorious. One thing you have to roll with, you have to be prepared for, is that players don't show. So you think like, oh, I'm good. This game's full, and 2 out of 6 show. And are you serious? Like, this happens. This is a thing. Like, you got to just roll with it and like, don't get all, don't take it personal. Don't panic. And so I was wondering how this is going to work. And there's an aspect of this particular con that was not as strong as it could have been. You'll recall that you couldn't get your players' emails ahead of time. Like, I requested 2 days before, could I get my list of emails? Because it's important, I would say, with a little experience at this, it's important to plug those strangers, to plug those people into your game, get them feeling like, no, you're in this. Like, you didn't just kind of sign up on a piece of paper on the back of the door. You're in this. Like, I'm sending you pre-gens, I'm sending you rules. Don't just ghost on me here. Like, you're trying to stack the deck that they feel like, oh, I can't blow that off. I got to get up. I actually have to get up in the morning and play that game. But I couldn't get their email. So it was a little weaker. I was already like a little on edge. Not on edge, but I'm like, we'll see how this goes,
No, I agree. And that is an under-recognized and underappreciated part of I think a good DM's role is like, you're the one herding cats as well. Yes. And you're also the hype man, right? Like, you're the one who is, Wednesday, who's playing today? Come on, 6 hours until I start killing some PCs. I mean, you have fun,
Right.
I routinely say those every time we have our we have a regular group that's been playing on Fridays for about like 5 years now. Every second Friday we game, and part of the reason that has worked is because I have committed myself to those Fridays. I'm running something every Friday, regardless of whoever's there. You're not wasting your time by showing up for it. Cool. And everyone else manages to sort of work their schedule around that. And then they just make sure that they've got those dates available. And I make sure everyone's, I send a straw poll to see who's going to show up for a session so I can plan accordingly.
Put a pin in running something no matter what. Put a pin in that. We'll get back to that. That's a good subject. I like that. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, it is. And I mean, that's, it's the thing. I mean, like, in my mind, that's part of the contract is I'm here to make sure we're all having a good time. And that's what part of that is, making sure you're not wasting your session of like just fucking around with something else or like some in-person groups. What they'll do is play like a board game instead if there's like less people or whatever. The reason I don't think I don't do that approach, partly because I play online all the time, but also partly because like it's not role-playing. Role-playing is my favorite hobby, and I want to provide the players that particular experience. And that's part of the DM's gig as well, is that if you've got like one of the reasons why I have come to appreciate these sandbox games more now is because it's so much easier to keep playing the same game each time you get together without having to worry about like, oh fuck, I gotta blue haze someone because they're not here this session, or someone's got I got to NPC it, or someone else has to play their character. Right. There's a huge amount of value in story-driven role-playing, and there's lots of reward that comes from that kind of really deep, engaging play. But when people's schedules don't permit for that, or it can just be really fucking disruptive, it can really end up being this really scattered thing where you're like, okay, wasn't I like left at a cliffhanger a month ago from this, and I've missed 2 sessions now, so where are we now?
Right.
And that's one of the things I found with our Star Wars campaign was that was a really story, like personal character driven thing. And then I started having scattered attendance with players, and it was really fucking with the story. And I ended up, my approach at the time was to go back and I do these war stories sessions in all my games where it's like a one shot set at either like a different point in the galaxy or in the world or a different time. So I can fill in some backstory for the characters, but do it in a fun, gamey kind of way, or fill in some, something that's going to come up later in the campaign or something like that. That's okay, but that's a lot of work because you got to come up with a bunch of characters and get the characters going. And also it means that they're not playing their characters as well. Some people are playing to play that one character because they really love that one character, and that's who they want to be playing when they're playing. So, that doesn't give those players what they're looking for. But getting back to the con, then we'll go to the pin. I agree. Like that not having the contact information for those players to get that initial information. Hey guys, here's the pre-gens to pick from. Here's what we're doing. If you have questions, shoot me. If you're not familiar with the game, shoot me an email. If you have questions about the characters or whatever else, shoot me an email. And also getting that hype thing going, like, hey, see you guys tomorrow, for this. With a one shot as much as possible, I want to hit the ground with, running as much enthusiasm as I can, because that will that will hopefully set the correct tone for the start of it and carry you through to the end of the session.
And hopefully punctually. And so leading into part of my GM issues here. So there was only one player missing, and I had too much focus on that. I had one player missing, and I had a guy that had been pinging me for days about what's the game like. So I had recruited him on Roll20 in Roll20's boards for that game.
Yep.
I'd done a pretty good job marketing the game. I'd posted it a bunch of places on Google Plus repeatedly in various communities and in my stream. And then I'd another good spot to market games is on Roll20's boards. Roll20 has 3.5 million registered users, so that's a no-brainer. So this guy had come through that, and he'd been asking me about it. And then he said, "Oh shoot, like you're full. Well, maybe next time, let me know if you have space. Is it okay?" He even asked, "Is it okay if I audit the session?" And so that's pretty hardcore. And so when a player was missing that morning, I was like all about like, I gotta find that guy. Like there's room. Well, I got hung up on that. So I let too much time go by. So next thing you know, it's like 25 after the start time, and it's okay. It's not the end of the world. And people are chatting a little bit and they're checking out pre-gens. So it's not a complete, and I knew that. So it got by me a little bit too, because I thought, well, this is cool. They're checking out the pre-gens. It's not like everyone's just sitting there.
Yeah.
And they're checking out Roll20 because not everyone's as familiar with it, and I know Matt Stark, had not played on it before. And so we were talking about that a little bit as I'm trying to find this guy. But I let too much time go by because it affects the other side of it, which I've already chatted with you about minorly, is that the end time. So of course we're behind. You can't start a 4-hour session a half hour late and not affect the timing. So of course, and I know it was coming, but I just ignored it. Yeah, don't do that. So that's a poor way to handle that. And so Kevin, you're like, oh, it's a few minutes, whatever, several minutes after the hour, you're like, hey, I'm going to have to run pretty soon. I'm like, don't, because I knew, I'm waiting for someone to call me on this. Hoping no one says anything, but I'm like, I know this is not the right way to do it. And so, you had to go at some point quite reasonably because we're well past the hour. But yeah, these are all things that you should, you got to respect the game. And I think that players appreciate this. Some are on a schedule that day and some aren't. But like, hey, this is when we're going to start. And I still have to work at this. I'm good. My logistics, for my self-awareness, I'm good. I'm pretty solid about logistics, not quite that granular to the session, but to the scheduling and posting it and reminding and keeping to that. I'm good at that. That part I'm strong on, and I've seen other GMs that are challenged by that, and I'm good at that. I'm not as good on that starting part, where someone wants to chat and that social aspect crops up and it's tough. And I'm getting now more out of one shots and into a regular group who know each other, because those folks want to chat, and it's perfectly reasonable and it's fun and it's a big part of gaming is social. So you hate to put the kibosh on Steve and Pete's, catch up kind of thing, but you got to get in there and go, folks, this train is leaving,
Yeah. Yeah.
or else your 3.5 hour scheduled session is like 2 hours and 40
Yeah.
minutes. You can't,
And that's like extraneous. I find that in my in-person groups, we waste more time bullshitting than we do in online. But
right.
I'm pretty disciplined with it. And it's, again, like I play the same group all the time, so it's easier to maintain those sort of rules. But as much as we can, when our start time is, that's when we're fucking starting. And we're playing. Like, we're not talking about other stuff. We can do that before the session, after the session, on the community or whatever. But that's more, again, that's because I've got the same group, and we have all, because I'm so fucking impatient when it comes to those kind of things, that I've clamped down on that pretty hard early on with this group, and we've been playing together for 20 years or something like that. So it's easy to do that
too. I'm wondering if your recording perhaps gives you a little more discipline too. Like, it's part of your structure. I mean, I'm a big believer that structure is underappreciated in plain sight, like the structure of it. So, like, am I recording now? When am I starting this thing?
Yeah.
And once you start it, are you really going to go on about your work issue right now? No, you're recording.
Yeah, that's actually right? That's a good point.
So I think that structure, I'm just thinking that structure really helps with keeping on the GM's mind. Once we start recording, there's no way we're talking about our significant others. So, and before you start recording, you're like, are we starting? Should I record? I like that. That focus, I think, is big. I bet you.
You're totally right. No, I bet you that is, because there's people, and I've had players after, like, in our pre or post chat stuff, they'll say something and they'll be like, that wasn't recorded, was it?
Right.
Jeez. So, would you run, if you were at the next online convention, would you run the same game? Would you run something different?
So it's a good question. So Cypher System is not a go-to system. I mean, I've run it a decent amount. I ran a mini campaign of Numenera when it came out, and I've played, a smattering of Numenera and the Strange scenarios online at cons, what have you. But it's not a go-to for running for me. The only reason I would probably run that again is because, as I have learned from people better than me, better at this than me, if not better than me, the hardcore serious gamers, what they do, and the folks that are, that have got this one-shot thing down, is at the beginning of the year, they determine, decide, and create a one-shot in probably 2 or 3 systems that interest them, and they run that all year. So they are running, they are going to run the following scenario using the Nemesis system, and they're going to run that at DundraCon, at KublaCon. These are all in-person, my Bay Area in-person gaming cons. Then they're going to run it at Big Bad Con, and they've got it in their hip pocket if something else comes up. And that's what they do. And they do that every year, so that that if you play their game in January, you won't, you're going to see that same game all year. Mm-hmm. And that's what the pros do, in my experience. The really solid, because they put a lot of juice into that scenario, and they wring that juice out all year. They're not constantly time-wise, their own time management with life. And then they see what happened, and they tweak it, and they improve it all year, every time they run it. And so, the only reason I would run it again is because we're still running, the 7 of us. So Assault on Singularity Base calls for 7 GMs and 36 players. And we're running it for a year. So we started running it on Memorial Day this year, on Memorial Day Gaming Con, and we'll run it through, we'll do a full year from that, which means running it through DundraCon in January, and then we'll put it to bed. We'll have run the circuit, and really run, because it was a huge amount of work. I mean, whatever, it was fun. Yeah. It was not a big deal. And at that point, I'm only running it because I'm running it for that. Really.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. Like what I've discovered about myself lately is how little I enjoy running modules, because I not so let me phrase that. It's not that I dislike running modules or like adventure paths or things like that. It's that I enjoy improvising so much. Like I love having to make up shit on the fly and figure out what's happening, and having having that loose structure that just came together the morning of, of like, oh, that's a great idea. I was walking the dog and I was thinking about this, and I'm going to do that tonight, and we'll see how it goes. That's part of the juice I get out of DMing. So I don't think I could do that thing where you prep one thing and run it each. Like I absolutely see the value in that, and how tight and how good those sessions would be, especially by the end of the season. But I really do enjoy the randomness of what's happening at the table and responding to whatever's happening at the table, and you can still do that in those sessions as well. But going in with a fresh idea and just seeing how it, how you adjust it and how it plays out is something that I enjoy so much as a DM, that I think I kind of have to go in with a fresh idea every time I would do one of these cons.
Interesting. I mean, the only thing I would say about that is that, these one shots, especially at a con, and more so in person than online, but true for both, is that they're heavily structured. The only challenge a little bit is that they're heavily structured. So you got to go in there, and that game needs to last between. Now you can, there's 4-hour slots, there's 6-hour slots, and there's 8-hour slots usually. But given that slot, let's say a 4-hour slot, that game needs to, you need to feel pretty certain that you're going to finish that whatever you're doing in 3.5 to 3 hours and 50 minutes, and that's pretty tough using sandbox. Usually that's definitely a driven thing. That's the only thing.
Yeah, like for you guys, that's why I, as much as your session in the convention, it was part of the, it was part of the ongoing campaign. That's why I gave it that heavy scripted, or sort of like, this is what you guys are doing here. Partly because like the transition from narrative play as a player and sandbox play, every one of my players has had difficulty with that transition, because they're sort of like waiting for me, and I keep waiting for me to prompt them with like, this is what, the quest giving NPC with the fucking thing over their head, right? Or I'm having to remind them like, look, this is not, I'm saying this, but this is the player or the character saying that. That's not necessarily true. They might be lying. Right? Or they may be mistaken, or whatever else. So for your guys' session, the ways that I kept the sandbox stuff is, I didn't know if you'd survive. So like, I knew what the challenges were, and like whatever happened in a one shot, it just happens. I rolled up random encounters for you guys to so that would be I did that beforehand, but that way there would be you guys, we had to experience some of that OSR play. Fortunately, you guys didn't have any sandbox stuff, and then I did end up cutting some stuff just for time, because you guys, we were running late in it, and I needed that full hour to do that last encounter. But I guess like one of the benefits with our regular Friday sessions is those are always 4 hours, right? And I always sort of approach those in a structured kind of, I need to have intro time, meet in the middle, and then a good solid clear ending. And especially for the Star Wars campaign, I always ended on a cliffhanger every week. And just by thinking of it in that way, and being mindful of like, okay, I got an hour left, what are we going to accomplish in the next hour? That helped with that prep. So but that said, I mean, like, by improving that way, not always it's gonna, it's not always gonna land either. So you could have really a shitty session of it as well. So
I think it probably raises, I mean, in my mind, it raises the challenge level a little bit, but it sounds like you're accustomed to it. So, I mean, if that's, and I'll also say, I mean, the reason I put it also that, that's what the pros do is also because of the time factor that impresses me, that they get this, like they're doing this every time. There are guys that they are running games every con, they're running 2 sessions every time. And they're just clockwork for years. And that impresses me. And so, but if someone has the time, and the inclination to put together separate sessions every time, well, that's awesome. I'm not even, that's, that of course is amazing. I'm just, to fit it though, I'm just impressed that they, to its maximum efficiency, if you have time issues
for sure
with life, to
Yeah.
get that done is because I don't get it done. I don't typically run games at cons, and I've been wanting to forever. So I'm really talking to myself of
Yeah.
how do I best get myself to do this,
And that's, that's a really good point too, of knowing, self-awareness as a DM is a huge fucking tool in your kit, right?
Yeah.
Partly like knowing what comfort level you need for preparation beforehand, or what resources. Like when I'm running something that's where I'm running from the seat of my pants, I'm relying a lot on like random tables and other stuff like that to help, keep that imagination flowing. So I'm not having to just come up with it myself. So it's having those resources together, which is probably no different than having a fully scripted scene before. It's just knowing what tools you need to be able to get through that session.
Yeah.
The other thing too, I guess, is, and this is not quite what we were talking about, but it's also being mindful of how you interact with other people too, right? Like how you respond to other people's, how they're interacting with the game. If I recently, not recently, but not so long ago, I lost my temper with my players because they were so clearly, obviously fucking metagaming. And it was so different from what they normally do. And I was like, no fucking way you're doing that. It was, they were trying to, basically, they were stuck in quicksand, and one of the players who had been under water for about like 5-6 seconds or something like that, or 5 or 6 rounds, he was trying to say that him holding his sword up, some other player would grab the tip of the sword and he would know to then let go of the sword so that he could free up a hand and do that. I'm like, fuck you. I was so angry about that. I'm like, you're completely shattering the illusion of what's going on here. There's no fucking way. So I said, that's fine. You're allowed to do that. But if I'm going to make you make a athletics roll, if you fail, you drop that in the quicksand and you lose your sword. Sure enough, you lost his fucking sword. But it was interesting because I talked to the player about that afterwards. I'm like, look, I didn't mean to, like, that tone was not appropriate for the response on that. And the way he wasn't reading the scene the way I thought I was describing it. He didn't realize. I'm like, look, man, you're under fucking water. You're not sure if you're going to get up again. You can't see what's going on. You're trying to hold your breath and you're struggling to barely get above water. That's, you think of the stories of like children who are drowning, who then end up choking their parents who are trying to rescue them because they're so panicked.
Right.
And the player was like, oh, okay. He wasn't thinking of it in that way. He thought that, he would be more able to interpret the wiggle on the sword and whatnot. So it wasn't in that case thing, but that's an example of where like I should have been more, had more control over my reaction to what the players were doing.
It's a good question. I mean, I've definitely gone through that very thing and experimented with. I've been more hardcore in the past where so players, it's natural. This is definitely one of those things where in a public game you definitely have to roll. You got to just be roll with it. But even with my regular game in the past, I've done things where players want to do that thing where, let's say there's a scene where they're going up to a major NPC and they're about to negotiate something or have some major interaction. What they want to do, of course, is not plan. They do minimal planning beforehand. Then they go up to the NPC. Then they start the conversation. Then they want to, after they've started the conversation and they've got some information to grind on, now they want to stop time and go into this weird space where they all get to discuss what to do, even though they're standing right in front of the NPC. Yeah. So that bugged me right from the get-go. Like, no, I mean, he's right there. So I would tell them, and I'm at one time I was super hardcore about this. And so part of it is setting expectations. It's okay as long as you set the expectations of what we're doing here, and if you do that right, I think 9 times out of 10 players go, okay, if that's what we're doing, okay. But just don't jerk it around. Make sure everyone knows what page we're on. You're directing in a sense. And I still do that once in a while where I can see, I can sense someone's about to go to this space that I just described. And I go, keep in mind, they're 3 feet in front of you. So they're listening. I mean, that's all. I'll just say that. And it calms that, because it's kind of fun, I think, to have. I understand the players, it's perfectly natural. They're not doing anything wrong, but I kind of want that spontaneity of like a little bit of hijinks where one guy says one thing and the other player goes, no, don't say totally. That. I mean, it's awesome. I mean, that's perfect.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we're coming up on the 2 hour mark right now. So what I'm going to ask you is, what are you going to run next at an online con?
So I put a little thought into that. So my list of games I was thinking of are possibly what was I thinking of? I was thinking of oh, specifically here's interesting at Nerds International, for example. So that specific one, not what would I run necessarily at the next con, but the next Nerds International con. So I noticed they're unusually, I mean, Genesis I think was the aforementioned Genesis system is a well received system, but it's not ubiquitous. And so at the Nerds International they had an unusual affinity for it. I noticed. So they had multiple. They only had at the height, I thought I saw about 20 games listed, and not all of them went, but they had 20 games listed, and a good, I don't know, like 15 to 25% were Genesis games, which is outsized for that
Yeah.
system in my experience. So that dovetails with one of my little project, well, I shouldn't call it a project, a thought at this point of I'm curious potentially to use Genesis with horror,
Mm-hmm.
which I haven't seen too much of. And I've got a lot of horror scenarios. And so I would like to port maybe even use a esoterrorist scenario or a Delta Green scenario using the Genesis system. And particularly for that con, because they seem to have such an audience for it. I think because it was kind of, there's a little bit, to get players for an online con, you really, this is I would say a major tip. You got to market your own game. You're the man. Get your own players. Don't think you're signing up and they're all going to come running. I mean, maybe, but don't count on it. You got to market that thing. And so Genesis at that con, I think you'd have an advantage because those Genesis games were full. So
one of the things, the next online con that I'm participating in is the Hobbsapalooza that my buddy Jason Hobbs is putting on.
Nice.
And I'm pretty heavily involved in the organizing for that. It's running from Friday, November 30 to Sunday, December 2nd. And it's going to be more OSR flavored. But one of the things that I'm going to be doing for that is making sure that the con itself is promoting the sessions. Because, a physical con, there's the gameplay that's going on there too, but there's also, I think the way they're drawing their money and the reason they're getting the majority of the public in is panels, is vendor space, is those other reasons why people are going to those cons. An online con, if it's just a gaming con, that's the only thing you're doing there. You're not doing panels, you're not doing whatever else. So for the con itself to not do some marketing and promoting of that is a bit of a I mean, I agree you've got to promote your own game and try and find players, but to a degree, the reason you're going through that venue is to try and draw more players in, right? And to whoever is engaging with that online con, they're going there to go and play games, and you need to help them find the DMs who are running those things. So I'm hoping that at the Hobbsapalooza, we're going to do a better job of trying to facilitate connecting DMs with players.
I think that's a great call. And you just consider that for an online con, your potential audience is the world. So it's the internet. I mean, figure how many places could you possibly advertise on the internet? There's got to be that. There's a lot. You could fill all your time. I realize obviously there's a huge percentage of places that it's not appropriate to push a gaming con for whatever reason because it's a focus, but there's got to be a ton, and even getting good at that, there's got to be some good marketing skills, tips, procedures, protocols for doing just that, which I've tried to hone a little bit just to market my own games. But I totally agree. That's a big deal. I totally agree.
Well, it's a great idea that you had about posting on the Roll20 community too. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, so I really got to make sure I take advantage of that too, because that's
Fantasy Grounds, Roll20 Fantasy Grounds. First of all, that's no brainer. I don't know nearly as much about Fantasy Grounds and how how much availability that is, like what their structure is. Roll20, it's easy. I mean it's easy. But I think there's got to be some serious low hanging fruit there for marketing.
For sure. So last thing, I guess, is would you recommend online cons for other players and DMs?
Absolutely. I mean, even I'll broaden it just a tad. I mean, you got to try an in-person con too. Like, for
Yeah.
some people, unfortunately, depending on where they live, it may not be close. And I'm fortunate. I've got 4 cons, 4 serious cons within an hour annually, which is a luxury. But try it. Give it a shot, give it a chance, because they are crazy good. They are crazy fun. If you like gaming, I know there's probably, with all due respect, there's probably players that don't enjoy it. I would assume that's got to be true, but you got to try it because they
Yeah.
are crazy fun. Now, the online version that you asked specifically about, I mean, they're free. They're in your living room. What's the question? I mean,
Yeah.
unless you have, some folks have, I think, a barrier to online gaming, and that's another thing. That's a different discussion. But I think you should give online gaming a try. But if you're already past that, put it on
Yeah.
your calendar. Put your in-person geographic area physical cons on your calendar.
Yeah.
Put your online cons on your calendar. Now it's just free gaming. Like, it's an option. You don't have to do it. But if you forget about it, you're like, get it on your. I'm talking to myself again. Get it on your calendar. And now you got these people that want to run games for you. What's wrong with that? Or a chance for you to get all those games on your shelf, all those games right there on your shelf to the table, in one shots. And here it's a you don't have to wait for a con, but here's a preset situation to both bring you some players and to spur you, a date. It sets a date. Okay, let's get this done, Sean.
Yep.
So yes, I mean, for all those reasons, absolutely.
And I completely agree with all of those. So, Sean also, I'll mention, does a much better job of having an open table for other players looking for trying games or for looking for groups as well for one shots. So if you want to contact Sean, I will post this information in the description of the video as well too. But Sean, you can be reached at sean.patrick.phelan@gmail.com, and that's SEAN.Patrick, spelled the customary way, .Phelan, PHELAN, @gmail.com. You can also find Sean on Google Plus and on Roll20, and I'll have the links to those posted in the videos below. Sean, thank you so much for spending the morning with me. This was a lot of fun.
It was total fun. We gotta do it again, recorded or not. We should pop on some other time.
Absolutely. Well, especially I really am. We got not sidetracked, but we sort of dove into that idea of like system meeting fiction kind of stuff, and that's something that's been weighing on my mind. I'd really like to dive into that with you as well too. Awesome. But for those listening at home, thank you so much for joining us for this seat behind the screen. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns for myself or for Sean, please don't hesitate to leave a comment in the comment section below, or you can reach me on Twitter at Dungeon Musings or on Gmail at dungeonmusings@gmail.com, or again, you can reach Sean at sean.patrick.phelan@gmail.com. And finally, I don't have the link in right now, but I will be amending it too. But there is links in the description of the video to the charity fundraising campaign that we're running on the channel, called Heroes Save Villages. And this is something where we have paired up with SOS Children's Villages International, a really terrific charity that benefits children who are living in very, very difficult circumstances, either in North America or elsewhere in the world. Any dollar that is donated goes directly to SOS Children's Villages International and helps them do the very, very good work that they're doing. If you can also see that on the Heroes Save Villages campaign page, there's a bunch of cool rewards that are available, and we're constantly sort of amending those and adding new ones in. So if you have enjoyed this video or you enjoy the channel in general, I would just ask that you consider clicking through and learning a little more about the Heroes Save Villages campaign and SOS Children's Villages International. Finally, I'll end by thanking Sean again. Thanks so much for spending this time with me. This was a lot of fun. And thank you for running the game for me. And thank you for joining my game at the online con.
It was awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks for this invitation. This was fun.
Excellent. All right, folks. That is it for now. Thanks so much. And we will see you again soon.
Bye, everybody.